Hey guys, this is Ricardo, and I'm with.
Hey everyone, it's Ryan. This is here on the Tyran One YouTube channel, and it'll also be on the Soul Talk podcast episode. We're having a conversation about meditation, mindfulness, stillness.
And so I think before we started to record this, we were going over a post I had on my Instagram, which was the goal of meditation is not quieting the mind. Really, there shouldn't be a goal in meditation, in my view. But Ryan was saying that certain meditations that is the goal. Now,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're trying to say that you should always have that sort of like can you explain that a little further?
I think that when we consider Buddhist meditation, for example, usually it's presented as two types of practices. So one side is the concentration side of the practice, and the other side is the insight side of the practice. This is translated as cessation and wisdom, or cessation and insight, for example. But in the samatha practices of Buddhism, the practices where you're using a meditation object like the breath or a visualized object, stopping or stilling the mind is the aim of the practice. But on the other hand, in practices like Dzogchen, Zen, choiceless awareness, which Ricardo, you're very familiar with from the J. Krishnamurti teachings, there is no goal. There's no specific state that the mind is being geared towards.
Right.
But it's an interesting thing to discuss about, because I think the approach of not having a goal is very useful for meditation. Not having an aim is actually a pretty beneficial thing. What's your take on that?
So I feel that if we're going to go into even shamatha practices, like if we're doing mindfulness of breathing, I find that if I'm doing those practices, that I'm still having the aim still not be quieting the mind. So
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so I can have that as an intention, but it's not the goal. I want it to naturally happen. Even when I'm concentrating on the breath, if I'm concentrating on the breath, it's not, for beginners, they're going to use more effort than they should. Just like when you do Tai Chi practice, most people in the beginning are going to use strength in the actual chi or the actual energy. So, but later on, you start to relax, and that relaxation becomes almost this detachment of the actual goal itself. But you get to sustain your concentration on the object very naturally. And for me, that's sort of what I understand it as, where when we have a goal, which is, okay, I want to quiet the mind, that can hinder us. And even in your practice, you can see how that desire can, if it's too much, it can be overbearing, and you'll chase whatever that sort of projection is in any practice.
Yeah, I think that, you and I have both experienced the direct pain of setting up a goal in meditation and not hitting it. I think that's something that we're very, very familiar with. It's a good thing to illustrate, because for those deeper states of meditation to arise, what we consider samadhi, jhana, these really, really profound states of stillness or cessation, there's a serious thinning of the sense of self that happens. It's almost like it's not like you sit down in meditation and you as an ego enters this state that is called absorption or samadhi. That's not what happens. Your ego is the thing that vanishes in order for that sort of thing to arise. It's like the stillness is so profound, and then the factors of concentration begin arising, and they support further stillness and presence, and eventually it leads to an opening into one of these samadhi states. But the whole orientation of you being the person who's going to get it, that's not actually what happens. You know, when that stillness is so deep, there's not really a sense of you. There's not really a sense of your specific identity at that level of stillness anyways. So the problem I've had with this specific issue is I've gone on meditation retreats and I've made a clear goal, you know, this 10-day meditation retreat, I'm going to enter the first jhana, or this 14-day meditation retreat, I'm going to enter the first jhana. And there are meditation retreats oriented towards that, but the meditation teacher is always saying it's a matter of stillness, and it's not really up to you. It's not going to happen just because you decide that it's going to happen. You know, that's not how that specific thing works. These deeper states of meditation are not a product of ego. They're not a product of clinging. They're actually a product of letting go. They're a side effect of letting go.
Exactly. And I think there should be a clarification between a goal and intention. When you go into your practice, I feel that an intention is it's almost faith driven.
Yeah, great point.
Yes, before my practice starts, I want this to happen. But it's not out of a deep attachment to it. Like, oh, I want to experience jhana. No, it's almost like whatever happens, but I'm still striving for it. It's reverence. It's almost this honoring that this is the thing that you want, and if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen. You're still very content with the experience that arises in your practice. And I think that's another thing to go into, which is when people practice, I've always hear them say, I need to quiet the mind. When in the very beginning, why do you have that goal? Because then you're going to chase it. It's actually much better to examine the mind, even with all its thought process and all of its habits. That's a lot better. You're being more aware and sustaining that awareness in the monkey mind phenomenon. But most people in the beginning, I see they agitate the mind. Oh, I thought I was supposed to stop the mind, but I can't. And they give up in their practice. And I hear it all the time. I hear it all the time.
Yeah, I struggle with this for years. You know, when I first went to Dhammakaya, it's like on a really big poster board that the key to success is stopping the mind. And when you hear the word stop, you immediately think with force, you know, the way that you stop at a stop sign. And that's just not how it works. Like the mind stops when the mind stopping and stilling are the same thing. When the mind is totally still, thoughts and the excessive stream of them have come to a standstill. But the wording stop is, in my opinion, difficult because it can give you an impression that you need to use force. Even if it's not implied, just because of that word, you feel that you need to forcibly stop your mind. And this is inherently going to create internal conflict. It's just going to make meditation difficult because now you have a goal, a very clear one, which is that the mind has to stop. Obviously, your mind's chaotic and is nowhere even close to stopping. So the distance between where you want your mind to be and where your mind is right now is what you get hung up about in meditation. You have this image, this idea that it's supposed to be still, but your actual firsthand experience of it, that's not the case. It kind of reminds me of a U.G. Krishnamurti quote where he was saying that we set up this idea, paraphrasing, we set up this idea of what inner peace is, and that's a concept. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the reality of inner peace that is natural to the physical body and to the mind. The very concept of inner peace is the actual thing that obstructs real inner peace, which is natural to the body and natural to the mind. The concept itself is the obstructor. So in meditation, when we're practicing, this concept of what a still mind is supposed to be has nothing to do with the actual stillness you're going to experience or that you may find yourself experiencing. It's a thought, it's a concept, and that
and
very
to go,
concept can be the thing that actually blocks you from really opening up and becoming still.
and sort of a real life experience that many people would have is
Continue. Okay.
You may have a goal in which you may have externally. Maybe it's for your profession, and when you start to strive for it, when you strive for that goal, you realize that what you thought in your head of the A plus B equals C, the route it'll take, will take you to a place where it was completely different. Your experience in real life and what was in the mind was completely different. The route you've taken was completely different, and so is your meditation practice. Your meditation practice is very fluid. Life is very fluid. Again, you may have a goal, and you actually attaining that goal is so much more different when you experience it than what was in the mind. And going back to what Ryan was saying about stopping the mind was very interesting because, we both have that problem. And
for years, this is not just something that happened to us for a weekend,
yeah,
and we got over it. We this plagued us for for me, I would say 3, 4, maybe even 5 years.
Yes,
this specific issue we're talking about.
And when I look back, and what I could have done better is, what is stopping the mind actually? It's like what Ryan was saying, was stillness and awareness, and that's all it is from the very start, awareness. So when you start to sustain awareness, yes, you'll see the mind it's this sort of detachment from you being the mind in the beginning. The beginning state is you're being aware of the mind. You're detaching yourself from it. So no longer are you being the thought process and being the habits. And that's how clarity starts to happen. That's how stillness starts to happen. It's all right that in one session, your mind may not be stopping. It may not be still, because you're still being in that process of awareness. You may not see the mechanisms behind it, but that actually is so much better. That's how stopping the mind actually happens. And the wording is wrong, for sure. English language wording for stop is completely different, or even trying to describe it is a little bit off.
It is. Even when the Pali when a lot, like the word Buddhist concentration practices, right? So the word concentration translated from Pali is sama samadhi, which is referring to, the when mindfulness actually becomes or leads to absorption, leads to jhana. But the best term that they had for that at the time, the early English translators, Rhys Davids, they used the word concentration. That's really not what it is. It's more like Buddhist stillness meditation, because you're using specific objects to still the mind: breath, skeleton visualization, fire kasina, earth meditation objects, whatever. But the point is for the mind to become still in order for samadhi to arise. But how can you translate that into English? The best word that they used was concentration. It's a misleading word. Stillness is a better word.
Yeah, and I always find that when people, even stillness becomes a problem for people. Like any terminology, we can get into this, that, I need to strive for stillness. I need to strive for awareness. When you go into your practice and you have that, you can get lost in the fact that, you're forcing stillness. Again, it's always being the viewer of it. Even if your mind starts to say that, as long as you're being the observer of this phenomenon happen, that's where you want to be in the beginning. We don't need to go on to the later practices,
non-duality and all that yet. Yeah, right.
But I think it's important for the beginners to sustain or to understand this phenomenon, whether it's choiceless awareness or whether it's shamatha. That shamatha would be a little bit different, but it's still the same to me, which is, yes, you're focusing on the object, and trying to sustain it without much force until it becomes so natural that it's no longer you, like you were saying in the beginning, it's no longer you as the ego sustaining that. It's almost this, has a mind of its own.
Yeah, the intimacy with the object itself sustains it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even ways to practice, just using, for example, Bial and Wallace teaches a way to practice shamatha where you're directing awareness at awareness. You're having awareness of awareness itself, right? And that in itself can lead to access concentration, which is Bial and Wallace's definition of having achieved shamatha. So even from that place of just being persistently aware or having continuous presence, continuous mindfulness, even if you're doing a shikantaza practice or a vipassana practice where you're just observing, or vipassana would be better. I'm not talking about body scanning here, but just observing thoughts, observing phenomena. That stillness and that continuity of presence eventually leads to those deeper states of stillness and samadhi, even if it doesn't lead to like a full absorption where the sense doors are closed off or whatever. There's still very, very deep continuity of awareness, uninterrupted, moment to moment. And that's a very transformative thing. It's not actually the stopping and the ceasing that you want to force. It's the continuity of attention. It's the moment to moment mindfulness that we really aim for in the beginning. And eventually those moments stack up. At first when we practice, we have mindfulness for, 15 seconds before our mind wanders somewhere else. And eventually you get enough of these 15-second blocks where you start having a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, later, 5 and 10. And at that point, when you first started your meditation, 80% of the meditation you were distracted. And after some time, you've developed some skill. 80% of the meditation you're present, and only 20% you're distracted. If you're at a master's level, like some of the people Ricardo and I have met, Namkhai Norbu, John Douglas, abbot of the Dhammakaya temple, apparently these guys never deviate from awareness ever. So it's just constant.
And going to the more intricacies behind the practice of just general meditation, when you're in it, when you're sustaining awareness, it's important to understand the unconditional aspect behind it. What is awareness in its true essence is the unconditioned, the non-dual state of being, and you're aiming for that state to be solidified. It solidifies on its own and it's very natural, but awareness is pure. There's a purity behind it. When you meditate and you may see these things that you may consider bad, a habit, a memory, that awareness, just by you just observing it, very natural, something happens. There's a process that happens very naturally. Most people, when there is this phenomenon that happens, most of us will react to it. An emotional storm hits us, and it's 3 ways of reacting, which is we try to act neutral, which is a reaction. You try to run away, which is a reaction. And the last point is you try to fight it, which is still a reaction. So when we see how nature functions, when an actual storm comes in, the trees sway back and forth. The rivers still flow at its very natural pace. It'll take the least path of resistance. If rocks roll down, the rocks will roll down very naturally. They're not reacting. They're just going about it naturally. But with us as humans, we're prone to react to it when we're not just observing it as of a natural phenomenon. Like, it's okay that this is coming up. It's fine that this thing is here. Just be in awareness.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point when it comes to the meditation practice itself, just being non-judgmental in whatever comes up in the mind. When it comes to choiceless awareness and the Dzogchen practices of having presence, any of these methods that just have to do with non-judgmental observation. I feel like that's in a way very effective for dealing with emotions and dealing with stuff that comes up internally. Because the thing about the stillness practices is, although they're very, very powerful, it pretty much blocks the mind from everything. Like there's thoughts have stopped, sense data has stopped, and so there's a reason that Shakyamuni and a lot of these teachers said that cessation is not enough. Absorption is not sufficient for awakening. It's a step, but actually getting to the nature of the mind itself, getting to the nature, seeing the nature of phenomena, seeing the source or transcending phenomena, that is where the enlightenment really is. But samadhi is just a appropriate step, a necessary step in that direction. So when it comes to dealing with stuff in our lives, I think that non-judgmental awareness can even be more important than that being able to really shut things out or turn away from certain things. There's a use for that, Sometimes things, you don't need to give attention to various things, right? Sometimes stuff comes up and you don't actually need to investigate it. If you're a little annoyed, you don't actually need to get to the root of that. You can kind of just brush it off and move on to the next thing.
Yes,
but
exactly.
When it comes to very, very deep-rooted things, trauma, for example, stuff that's really in the depths of your personality, that non-judgmental awareness is very, very important. And the stillness is too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, say one thing is more important than the other. The thing about the stillness practices, the concentration practices, that they have purified your mind so that your attention is actually able to penetrate those depths. But of course, the non-judgmental awareness, the choiceless awareness, that's where the freedom from spiritual practices really comes from. The ability to just observe things with equanimity and not be taken away by any run-of-the-mill thing that comes up in our day and in our lives.
I think that it's important for us to do the practice of concentration. But like you were saying, when you have choice is a limitation. You're given a choice, this or that, two things or a variety of things, but it's still that's not freedom in itself. But I think you can, if the practice in itself, when you go into it in that almost choiceless way, absorbed, I think absorption can lead to certain insights and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the purity is really there in the mind stream when your mind has become that still and has really accessed those deeper levels of awareness and stillness. There's things that you wouldn't have been able to see without that purity, without that purification of mind, without that attentiveness and refinement of attention. It's like there are things buried deep within us that come up as a result of spiritual practice. I think Goenka had a great example of this, of hot coals and pouring water on hot coals, and all this steam comes up. Those hot coals are those dark or those deeper aspects of our personality and our lives, that the charge and all the emotion is still there with those experiences in the subconscious. And when you start practicing meditation, it's like pouring water on those coals. All this stuff starts to come up. And actually, when you have skilled concentration, or when you have refined attention and awareness, you're really able to navigate those things much better than without it. And I think that's one of the utilities of concentration, or the utilities of stillness. If something is coming up, you're actually able to stay with it. Without that, without that refinement, without that purification, stuff can come up and it'll run right past you, because you don't have the presence to stay with that internal experience. There's just not enough stability in your mind stream for that to occur. So I think that's a useful thing. It's different when you're in therapy and someone's facilitating this experience for you, and they're really guiding you through it. But when it's happening on your own, on a meditation retreat, and you haven't talked to anyone in 8 days, it's very useful that you have some training in the stability of your mindfulness to be able to handle some of these experiences head on.
And going back to even being non-judgmental awareness in those moments of trauma or stuff, like, I think it's almost like you have a garden and you have memories and habits that you consider good and beautiful. But then you have weeds in the garden. Most of us want to remove it, and some of it is tugging in. It's harder to get. But we always say that's bad, but we don't ever actually understand that the weeds are still part of nature. There's a reason why they're there. It's the same as other creatures and insects. But most of us say, oh, those things are bad, let me remove it. Then we go into our meditation practice, whether concentration or choices awareness. When those experiences arises, you're either still sitting there in awareness of the object or choices awareness in a very non-judgmental state. Being poured, like the analogy that Brian was saying, when you pour that water, it's much more smoother, colder, instead of going like this, spraying it all over the place. Because most of us, we want to remove that pain so much. We want to remove that habit so much. But when you are like this, pouring the water and trying to remove it, concentration and awareness starts to act the same. You become agitated.
Right. Yeah, you have a good point. When you try to force those things out of you or choke them down, it seems to aggravate the situation, as opposed to looking for, the real gifts and treasures in some of those even negative or like darker aspects of ourselves.
And it's clarity arises from that sort of understanding. Like, you'll see how that affected you properly, and it's not you understanding. The meditation in itself will grant you the clarity rather than you using logic to understand the situation, which is what most people do. And that's not what it is. That's very limiting. You know why? Because the mind you have your own ego and all of its limitations. Oh, I'm this and that. You saying I'm this is already setting a structure to your life. From this part to this part. When you have so many other varieties, though, there's so many other things that you can be and do. And once that starts to surrender, and have that clarity or have awareness, clarity starts to happen. It's not the mind keeping it in this one state, which is your ego. Clarity happens and you see things much more differently rather than the ego understanding it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can end with this final point that I'll ask you. This may be 10 minutes, I don't know, but I think after this, we can conclude. Yeah. I've heard you say before, after you started to experience non-duality, after some years of your training, I heard you say, this whole time I was thinking that there was something to change, but then I realized that there was nothing to change. So for people who have done this for a while, we understand what that's all about, but can you give a beginner a kind of understanding on what that quote actually, or what those words mean to you?
This hits so close to home. I remember this lady told me this question, like, what was it that the most thing that you learned throughout your whole experience of meditation? And it just came out so naturally. There wasn't anything to change. Really, there wasn't. Why? Because when you start to enter that being state, you start to see things in perfection.
Right.
But what led to there was trying to, going back to the whole understanding of being non-judgmental. I didn't understand that in the beginning of my practice. I
Oh,
didn't.
of course not. It was
Because
all judgment all the time.
yes, like, oh, I thought Buddhism was the highest practice. I thought that, I wanted enlightenment. I wanted psychic abilities. And those are still judgments in a way, because when you desire a certain thing in your practice, you're setting up a limitation already, a condition. When I do this, this is going to happen. That's based on conditions. And so I wanted to change also who I was. I wanted to be this better person. I wanted to be a happier person, someone that what I thought was ideal for me. Everyone has this. Everyone wants to strive for this, especially when they get into meditation.
A better version of themselves, of course.
Yes. And there's
But it's
nothing
still
wrong with
self.
that. Exactly. And that's the problem.
Yep.
If you go into deep practice, changing the self is still limiting to the self. You may not have the negative habits as before, but it's still sustaining a self. You're still limiting in this sort of category.
Yeah, you're still in the relative dimension and things that are attached to time, form, change.
And so after sort of, even with my major thing was healing, I wanted to heal. And once I fully let this idea of healing go, this is what started to happen. One of the reasons why I even started to meditate was healing.
Yep.
And you're only going to pursue healing your entire life. Why? Because life makes you unsatisfied. Life is suffering. So you're going to go through your whole life chasing this idea of healing. There comes a moment where you realize oh my God, this is identity. It's limiting me. And once that started to dwindle, I started to realize, oh my God, I'm starting to be comfortable with what my life is right now than what it would be, than what I thought it would be if I was this other person or my meditation was different. Instead of forcing the garden to be what it was, I started to let it cultivate very naturally. I gave it the right amount of nutrition. I gave it the right amount of sunlight. I was very relaxed. Same with my practice. Whatever happened. Whatever arises naturally. And it was no longer a goal. There was no longer a place to be. There was a point where there was no longer Ricardo. And people think it's all about cultivating something. It's not. You have it already in you. You're just breaking it down. You're breaking the limitations that have programmed you, the habits, the ideas. One of it, which is love and kindness. Everyone has that. But you have these things that are preventing it. And you're just removing it very naturally. So that to me was when I started to understand there wasn't anything to change. Everything's so natural. And so with going into my practice and meditation, same thing, everything is very natural. It's all right if I have a day where I'm having a bunch of thoughts.
Right.
There's no difference between it being quiet either.
Yeah, the dichotomy is gone.
And I remember J. Krishnamurti saying this. He said, I was in a car going to a place, and I was with a bunch of people describing what awareness was, or trying to talk about awareness. Like, what is it? Oh, awareness is this and that. When they weren't aware of the whole entirety of the drive, what they were hearing, what they were seeing, they weren't sustaining awareness at all. They were talking about it.
It's a great point, man. I try to, even when I teach kids, pointing out awareness is not, it's not something that just clicks immediately. You tell people to be aware of their own awareness. And I mean, when I've done it with kids, some of them just say, I don't know what you're talking about. Because the awareness is obscured with thought. They can't differentiate between awareness and thought.
That's true. And that is, and I think this is why I said in the beginning, it's better for people to understand that the first step of it is that detachment state, that you're starting to view thoughts for even for a second, like, oh, I'm thinking of that, and it goes away. Then you're going to be the thoughts again, and you're distracted, whatever. That was slight awareness. That's not awareness of the aware, but that's
yeah, but it's still establishing and becoming, you're having awareness. It's just directed at thoughts or directed at phenomena.
Yes.
But doing that, eventually you get a sense for, what is this awareness? And that's when you become aware of awareness. Exactly. So that's useful, very, very useful. But for people who haven't done that kind of observation, you tell them, be aware of your own mind or your own awareness. Recognize the observer or observe the observer. It doesn't even make sense to most people. Right.
Or your natural state is no identity. What? I'm Ricardo. I have these things, and I know who I am. I work here, and I'm there. Okay.
Yeah, you have all the thought structures, all the memories, all the emotions, the form, physical body, all those things you identify with your most basic state or your most fundamental state, but they're actually not.
But who are you without those things? That's what we're uncovering. Who are you without being Ricardo, Ryan? If we gave a thing, right? Yes, we can describe a tree, but the tree itself has a different experience when you're with it. That's like, I can describe you what the sensation of going on a roller coaster is. The experience of it is totally different. You're like, oh, okay, I know what it is. But then because of the words and the descriptions and the linguistics of it, you categorize it. You're like, oh, this is like this, and this is very computer-like. So the experience is dulled then.
Yeah, it's covered limited. Up with concepts.
Mm-hmm. Or even with people, this is my last thing I'm going to say, which is, even with people, I see it all the time. Oh, you used to be a monk. Oh, you do wildland firefighting. That's cool. And they instantly put me into this, like, their own little category. And that moment, they're no longer talking. And this is a J. Krishnamurti quote, which is, not verbatim, but when you do that to an individual, you're no longer talking to that person. You're not experiencing the person for who they are. You're talking to what your projections are for that person, to the category of that person. And I see this with people today, with politics.
Totally.
Oh, you're a liberal. Oh, you're a conservative. Instantly put you in a category. You're talking to that person now for what your projections are and your ideas. You're no longer talking to face-to-face, experiencing the person for what they are. And so in meditation, we do this with ourselves, and that's why we always say, oh, there's something to change. There's something to change in this person. There's something to change in us. Is there really? And that's something for you to explore.
Yeah, of course, there's habits that can be changed. There's circumstances and conditions that can be changed, but the aim of spiritual practice is to change less, right? The thing that is not bound, not possible to be changed. Anything that can change is impermanent. So this is the main demarcation line between spiritual practice and personal development. Personal development and what most of the world engages in outside of the contemplative traditions is about improving conditions, even in a spiritual way, right? But very, very deep contemplative practice is about transcending the impermanent. And that which is not impermanent is changeless. So in that sense, the deepest aspect of ourselves isn't subject to change. But sure, you could say everything else is, but that's really what the path is and at least my practice up to this point has geared towards, you know, Ricardo and I both you and I both went through that, where at some point you realize that this identity that needs to be healed, or this person that needs to be healed, that whole thing is the very thing between your awareness and vast spiritual unfoldment. That concept, it's like, as long as you're a person that's in time, it's never really going to happen. As long as you identify with that and you hold on to that, being a person in time that's hurt, is going through life looking for, you know, those things that will make you whole. I mean, that's just, it sounds awful for me to say this, but it's just very far from what actual, very deep awakening is about. I feel like a lot of that is still at the level of therapy and, you know, personal healing, and there's a place for that, but that's different than what you and I are talking about.
Yeah, we're talking about, again, like you were saying, the difference between the deep spiritual practice and what we see with it today.
Yeah, because so much of Buddhism
change.
today is therapy. You know, it's so much of Western Buddhism has just turned into therapy. That's really what it has become. And mindfulness, as great as it is that it's so available and accessible now, it's mostly used in a mental health capacity as opposed to a spiritual discovery capacity.
And the only reason why you can sell it is because you're still in the relative. You're still in the state of trying to change something, which is how we live today. It's always about exchange, change, phenomenon.
Yeah, you can sell growth, but you can't sell giving up, right?
No.
It's hard to sell. It's hard to sell letting go and just.
Exactly. Like you can, yeah, we're gonna change you in this way and you're gonna gain this, but again, there's no gaining, or there's.
Yeah, I could get excited about that. You know, I could get excited about getting better, but you tell me my ego is gonna vanish and all that. You know, there's no self. The mind is an illusion. Yeah, it's very difficult to sell that. You know. I think this was good. You know, we can end things here, and yeah, I'm not sure what our next topic will be, but maybe we'll take a quote from a spiritual master or something and break it down and see what we come up with. But yeah, to wrap things up, I think, yeah, there was nothing to change to begin with. Anything that changes is not the true self. It can't be, by definition. So
Well, thank you guys for joining.
All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Peace.